My grandmother was an excellent cook, and a lot of the dishes that she learned to make, she were Creole meals from New Orleans, and her mother fixed, and they became traditions in that family even until today. One of the meals in particular was gumbo, Creole gumbo, and every Christmas, my grandmother would make gumbo for the whole family up until the day she died. And it was a specific recipe to her, and gumbo would have crabs and shrimps, and I think she put oysters in hers, and sausage. It had to be a special kind of sausage, and okra and corn and chicken and veal. Just about everything you could think of went into this gumbo. And every Christmas, it was expensive to make, extremely expensive to make. So she would start collecting the meats and freezing them early in the year so that by Christmas time she could make this great big pot of gumbo for Christmas. And everybody looked forward to the gumbo. As my mother grew up, even though she didn't make the gumbo because it was still my grandma's job to make the gumbo, she learned how to make the gumbo just by being in the kitchen and so forth. And when my grandma passed away, it became my mother's job to make the gumbo. And the scary part for my mom was, can I make it as good as my mom, And really the answer to that was no. No one can make it like my grandma did. But eventually, because she became the gumbo maker, everybody learned to love her gumbo just as much as they had loved my grandmother's gumbo. So the next generation all had my mother's gumbo. And when I say this, now you have to understand, all the cousins, even though my mom eventually moved here to Peoria with me, we would have family come from Chicago for Christmas to get some gumbo. And you didn't have Christmas. It wasn't Christmas unless you had gumbo. I mean, no, we may have something with it, like some chicken on the side or ham and so forth, but the gumbo was the main thing. You had to have your gumbo. Well, 3 Christmases ago, my mother passed away. And she passed away 3 days before Christmas. And just before she passed away, in fact, the day before she passed away, my mother and I were out looking for gumbo filet, which is the main spice of gumbo. We were all over Peoria looking for this gumbo filet. And the year before, we had a hard time finding gumbo filet. In fact, I don't think we found it. We had to borrow some. At the very last minute, we had to borrow gumbo because we had to make the gumbo, right? But we couldn't find it, so we borrowed it the year before. This year, the day before she passed away, we walked into Dixon's Fish House and we almost fainted because they had bottles of gumbo filet just sitting there. And we went in there to get the shrimp for the gumbo, not knowing that they had gumbo filet. And we were like shocked. We were like ready to hug each other, because we had found this gumbo filet. And so we knew we were going to have fresh gumbo filet for the gumbo that we were going to be making for Christmas. And it just so happened that she had a stroke and passed away 3 days before Christmas. So when Christmas came that year, everybody wanted the gumbo. And my mother's Myrtle wasn't there to make the gumbo. And being the oldest grandchild, I had to make the gumbo. And I didn't know if I could remember how to make it. I never had made it by myself because my mom always made it. That was her job. I was always sitting around the kitchen and helping her cut up the stuff and so forth and so on, but I never had to make the gumbo myself, and I had to make it. And everybody truly needed the gumbo that year. So I just said, I gotta make it somehow. And somehow I knew that it would come out okay because I had a feeling that Mert was going to be right there helping me make that gumbo. So I made the gumbo. And I remembered every step. The memories just flowed. You got to cut this up, and then you put the flour in, and you got to make the flour. People would come by and say, well, aren't you supposed to? I said, no, that's not the way Myrtle did it. I remember she would put the flour in over all the meat, and then she would just, wait until it got all brown. It was called making a rooks. I think that's what they called it. And I remember her saying that, and you got to make it brown. You got to get it brown, and then you put the water in, and then you put the okra in, and then you put the tomatoes in. And I could remember the sequence just from watching her make that gumbo, and it came out tasting like pretty much like her gumbo. Well, as you can well imagine, that's my job now. I make the gumbo every year, and at Christmas time, nobody else in the family makes gumbo but me. I'm the gumbo maker now.